Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop, where over the last 5 decades, our family's built hundreds of boats, including the 29-footer there in the background that we use during our summer charter season, done thousands of repair jobs. And today we are jumping right into fixing a hole in this fiberglass console. Now this would be like episode 4 of our project boat series, but if you just want to know how to fix a hole in a console, this is the right episode for you. That's what we are covering today. And if you jump over here, I've got a table full of tools and supplies. You're going to need some acetone for cleaning. We're using a quality vinylester laminating resin from our friends at Fiberglass Warehouse. You're going to need some MEKP, that's going to be your activator and catalyst. We've also got some cool little additives. We're going to be making a custom vinylester putty or filler for filling some screw holes. We've got our fiberglass, we've got some CSM, and we got some 1708 biaxial already cut. And this is going to be a great episode if you're interested in DIYing some of these projects. If you took this to a boat shop and had it professionally done, you might pass out if you get the price for it. It's going to be steep, but it's totally in the realm of doable for the average person. And this is a non-critical, kind of what I call a non-structural. It's not like it's below the water line or anything that's going to cause any major problems if it doesn't go exactly perfect. So this is a great place to start. So in the previous episode, episode 3 of our project boat, if you jump back one, we used some heavy-duty grinding tools such as this little D-wall. That is a 4.5 inch with either a 24 or 36 grit sandpaper. We also used a fine, like a multi-tool, for cutting out some of the material that was in there. And then we used something like a little D-wall carbide burr for cleaning out some of the smaller holes and whatnot. But we're mainly going to focus on working from the inside today. Now, if y'all follow me around on this side, we have already gotten this side filled in with just 2 layers. We went up and down and across with some nice 1.5 inch, kind of just your standard blue tape that everybody in this industry uses. But we did something a little different on that side. Now again, if you jump back in the channel, this is a material called peel ply that's got some really cool uses. You can apply it over glass that's been applied, and it'll reduce the amine blush if you're using epoxy, and it will also, when you peel it off, it'll leave a smoother finish than just raw glass. But I actually put a layer of that on the inside under the tape. I hope my cameraman can zoom in there. If you see, you can see these red lines that match up. So we did a layer of peel ply, and then I taped over it. And I'm going to try it in 2 different methods. Quite honestly, I've not used the peel ply exactly like that prior. One of the easiest ways that I've found for doing something like this is just to multi-layer it with tape and close that hole up, and it will be coming with glass on the inside. Now, there are other ways to do things. For example, I've seen people online using like a piece of cardboard, and they're using like some packing tape. I don't know if you guys can see the shine on there, and basically plugging the hole that way and then taping it in place. And many plastics, for example, I went to Lowe's and got just a little plastic lid, and many plastics will repel fiberglass, and you could theoretically like put it over a hole like that and fiberglass it from the backside. But I'm going to demonstrate for you folks because it's interesting. There's always more than one way in most cases to do some of these jobs. Now, we've been doing this a long time, and I do this professionally. I'm licensed with the Coast Guard to build boats and used to do insurance caliber repair work, and we've restored I don't know how many boats in my career. But there's many variables, and in this channel I'm trying really hard to show options. I know in some parts of the world some materials may not be available, or some of these materials, the budget may prohibit the use of one material over the other. So that's why sometimes throughout the channel you'll see me show options, and I'm oftentimes trying to use different techniques so that you might have some flexibility there. So what I was doing is basically tacking it on one side and running it across, kind of overlapping it just a bit, each piece. Now on the smaller holes, you can just run a piece directly over the hole. And we're gonna do another video actually kind of focusing on the smaller screw holes and whatnot, kind of as a different video. Our videos tend to run fairly long, but they're very detailed there, folks. So I know sometimes I get a lot of questions and we try to answer them, but many times the answer to your question is within the video, and I try to add content that's valuable all throughout the video. So if it's on a general topic that you think is close to what you're looking for, if you just hang in there and watch it, there is a good chance that your question will get answered. So you can see what we're doing there is we're just doing a double layer of this tape. And what happens is even if the fiberglass sticks to this tape on the back side, once it's cured, we'll pull off what we can, and we're gonna have to use a grinder to do some more surfacing anyway. Now when we flip this thing around, I'm gonna show you a little more about surface prep, because prep is paramount when it comes to doing a quality job, this kind of work. A lot of folks want to hurry up and get right to putting the fiberglass or the filler or the putty on their repair job. But if you don't have a good foundation, it's like building a house. If your foundation is not true and straight and solid, anything you do beyond that is going to be compromised. And that is the way your fiberglass work is going to be. Now, I had mentioned earlier that we were using this piece of like rubberized mat to work off of, and it's very handy for something like a console, because I don't have to worry about scratching this thing as we pivot it. But a piece of foam rubber, you could even put a piece of plywood or something down, but just something that's not abrasive, so that as you're spinning this console. And what we did earlier, and again, you can jump back to our previous episode, is we took a high-speed grinder and we beveled and got down to raw fiberglass there and kind of tapered it down to a nice bevel. And then we cleaned out all these openings really good with a die grinder and sandpaper. And then what we did just a few moments ago, prior to getting ready to fiberglass this, is I took a little bit of acetone, which is a very, very common solvent or thinner there. And a lot of times we'll put it in a little squeeze bottle like that, where you can just get small amounts as needed. And we wiped everything down in there that we're going to be fiberglassing, just to be sure we don't have any sweat or oil residue or anything like that. So we are getting ready to start actually applying some material. Now, I've had a number of questions about making like a vinylester putty or filler. I think a lot of guys overseas, down in Australia, I think sometimes you call like a bog, basically a filler of some type to fill in some of the screw holes and little imperfections that our actual fiberglass, like our mat or our 1708, may not go down into. And for this particular mix, I took a 1 quart container and we put about 1/2 inch of resin in the bottom. And again, we're using the vinylester, which if you're not familiar with vinylester, seems like a lot of folks aren't. You hear an awful lot about epoxy, which epoxy is great. There's nothing wrong with it. There's just some nuances to working with it, and it can be quite expensive, and sometimes it can have compatibility issues with maybe gel coat and some of the other paint systems you may want to use. Polyester resin is what most boats are built out of, but polyester resin is not gonna bond as well as your vinyl esters and epoxies are to like an older part. And I can almost guarantee you that this console was built out of polyester resin. Vinyl ester kind of splits the difference between the two. It is much, much, much stronger than polyester. It's not as expensive as epoxy, and it's completely compatible with gel coat, which we do plan on re-gel coating the interior of this boat. And for you folks overseas, we would use a wax gel coat, or what you guys would call a flow coat, which is basically the same thing. So we're going to be using a mixture to make that little bog there. We use some of the West Systems, the 403, which is a microfiber, and then we used some colloidal silica, which is very, very popular. Cabasil, Aerosil. Matter of fact, we buy it in big, giant bags. You can see we got a bulk quantity over there. Now, this is one more additive that's going to add a lot of strength to your filler that you may have not seen me use much before. This is a 1/4 inch milled fiber, and it's a strange looking product. Basically what that is little teeny short fiberglass fibers that have been milled down. That is from Fiberglass and the 1/4 inch milled fibers. And what I did, I had approximately, again, about a 1/2 inch of resin, and I did 4 spoonfuls of the microfibers, of the colloidal silica, and the 1/4 inch milled fibers. And you can come up with all different kind of consistencies. And I wanted something here that would penetrate pretty good. I didn't want anything super, super thick, but if I wanted it thicker, we might do 5 spoonfuls of each or 6 spoonfuls of each and get the mixture we are looking for. So what we're gonna do first is we're actually gonna fill some of these screw holes around the perimeter of the main hole. And the reason we're doing that is if you got a little screw hole that's kind of steep and the edges are short and sharp, your heavier glass fibers are not going to be able to work down in there very well. So we're going to take a little bit of our vinylester putty mixture, and this will allow us to fill some of these little holes prior to us fiberglassing. Now we're using a little bit of MEKP, that's methyl ethyl ketone peroxide, and we're probably going to go with about 15 or 20 drops. You know what, we're going to make it more like 10 or 12 there. That ought to be just fine. Generally at about 1.5 to 2% on your vinyl ester products, kind of depending on the temperature. And you want to turn this, mix and turn, and you can see it changing colors just that quick. It kind of went from a purple or pink to a green. That way you know that that catalyst has activated. Now in the past, you folks may have seen me use some dyed catalyst, some red dyed catalyst, but it can be a little tricky to find these days. For some reason, availability on that is a little difficult. If I find a good source on it, I will try to link that below our video's description. I just had a comment I read from over in Scotland, said they were having trouble finding some of the stuff we use. We do have Amazon links for all the materials, all the tools we use, a lot of the raw materials we're using, and it's a convenience for you guys, and it does help support the channel there. So be sure to check out below our video's description. The links will send you to a lot of these materials. And the folks at Fiberglass Warehouse, if you want to try some of this vinyl ester resin, there is a Fish Bump TV discount code, and you guys can save some money by taking advantage of that. So come right on over here, and you can see what we're talking about here. We've got some little screw holes on the perimeter that we have already cleaned out. They're dry, they're ready to go. And what I'm going to do is just take, before we go to glassing, I'm going to put some of this vinyl ester putty or filler right down in there, and it's going to flow into those little screw holes much better. And it's actually okay if a little bit of this gets around the perimeter. You guys that do auto body work, or anybody out there that's done any sheetrock or drywall work, matter of fact, while we're here, we may go ahead and use up some of this material. There's no reason to let that go to waste. I'm going to wipe that pretty tight. We're probably going to put a little piece of CSM or matte over that. Now again, we have thoroughly cleaned this as well, and if you're just tuning in, you can check the previous episode and you can see how we spent nearly a full day cleaning all the surfaces. Again, you can see this larger one here. We're going to go right in there with some of this vinyl ester filler. You can see how pretty of a job that does. Folks, our goal is to make this console better than it was originally, so we're going to beef it up in certain areas. We are going to come back with a composite core. We're going to be using the Coosa Coosa board for the steering wheel reinforcements. We're gonna try to really use quality material so whoever gets this boat knows that they are getting something that's gonna last them a very long time. We're moving right on up. Work that in several different ways if possible. Like I said, folks, our videos tend to run a little on the long side, but they're high in detail, and it's not going to give you a false idea of how long this should take or what's involved. We try to do this accurately. And folks, this is not something that I've just picked up as a hobby. I said I've grown up in a boat shop. My father was a professional boat builder. My brother is a boat builder. My family, my son Logan, who's behind the camera today, he would make 9 generations of our family on the Gulf Coast. We've got boat builders and captains and fishermen throughout our lineage and our heritage there. And I grew up in this boat shop. My father built this shop with his hands, and he's been gone for quite some time. He passed away when I was a young man, but he left me with a lot of knowledge, and I'm very excited and happy to share with folks. It seems like we're losing a lot of the trades these days. A lot of young people maybe don't have the advantage of having someone like I did to work side by side, a tradesman or a craftsman. And I've been getting a super positive response from everybody, and I want to know how much I appreciate everybody out there that's been watching the channel and following what we're doing. So there we go. We pretty much used up that little batch. Sometimes you may have just a little bit more, and I think we had one more little hole right up in the, just work that in really nice and tight. Very good. I would say that was about perfect for that batch. Look at there, folks. We hit every hole, and that is how much we had left on that one. So that's pretty good. So we are mostly going to be focusing on this spot right here. So while that is still wet, we are going to be moving right forward. Now, a lot of times we have a lot of questions about a lot of the topics that we work with, and a lot of times folks may not have seen every episode that we've put out because we have well over 100. But like cleaning up, for example, I always keep a little 5-gallon bucket of acetone in our little putty board there, and it's just so easy. We're not wasting hardly any acetone because our bucket, most of it falls right back down in the bucket. We're going to set that to the side. And then we got a little bit, just a little bit of putty left there. I tend to try not to put any more solids back in the trash can or in my washing bucket than I have to. So a lot of times I will knock some of that off. You hit that little blade once or twice. Now again, folks, this is acetone. It is highly flammable. We're in a big open shop with plenty of airflow, but you would not want to be in an enclosed space working with that because the fumes are not great. It's not something you want to be breathing a bunch of. So let's move right on over. Now I wanted to show what I've done is pre-cut some pieces of CSM, and y'all see I got these labeled with an S. That would be the smaller pieces, and then we're going to be putting our 1708 like a sandwich, and then we're going to be putting some of our larger pieces, which you can see we've got the L on these, and I have cut these so that this largest one is going to go pretty much all the way out to the edge of where we sanded, and then this is going to be our main structural reinforcement, and then the short is going to be the foundation. We're going to put this down first, and we're going to kind of stack these. But prep work is such a big part of doing this, folks. Sometimes you may spend an hour or two getting ready and having a table where everything is set up so that when you start working, it can flow very smoothly. Now, I've got a lot of experience doing this, but I think a lot of it can translate to you folks at home if you just take your time, plan ahead, do your research, and you can save yourself lots and lots of money. So what we're gonna do, we've got our pieces that we're gonna be using for that particular stack, and I went ahead and poured up This is about a half a quart or so, about 16 ounces, probably more like 15 ounces. And I'm gonna go pretty heavy duty on the catalyst for this one. I'm gonna go about 7 or 8 cc's. And you should see a pretty distinct and rapid color change as we go to mixing this. When you see that color change, that lets you know that that material is activated. Generally, with most polyester resin, 1 to 2% is pretty typical. It seems like with vinylesters, you need to run a little closer to like 1.5 to 2%, a little bit hotter, a little higher ratio. And the hotter it is, say if it's in the 80s or 90s, you're gonna wanna use less catalyst. If it's really nice and cool outside, you can get away with using a little more. But you can see there again, we got a very distinct color change with our material. So I'm gonna go ahead and what we call 2-pot this. We're gonna take it out of our little 1 quart mixing cup and transfer to a pan. And I'm a big fan of using a roller. That is just a 3/8 snap. That's an inexpensive from Lowe's or Home Depot. And we do a little trick sometimes where we actually wrap the roller with some tape and then spin that back off of there. And that's gonna give you a really nice, really clean roller to work with. So today we've got our small one. That's gonna be the one that would start first. And what I have done, folks, is I call this making a ragged edge or a taper on the edge. That's gonna give you a better blend when you go to transition this on the console. Having that feathered edge is gonna really be nice. I'm gonna wet the bottom side of the 1708 and then flip it. That in a bit. You could use a piece of plastic or something flat, and we may transition this here in a second and do just that. And then we've got our large. We've got our large here. I had it labeled, but I'm just going to take that little label right off of there. We're going to go over that. So we're kind of making, it's almost like a layer cake, if you will. Now you could do this on the console itself, but sometimes it is easier when you're trying to go over a gap or an opening to go ahead and make your laminate stack there. We'll take this roller with. Go, folks, y'all can follow me. We're gonna be sure to get plenty of resin on our foundation there. We do not want to dry laminate. You don't want to under wet or over wet the materials. Now sometimes what you can do, I'm going to roll a little bit of resin on here and just roll this a little more to get some good transparency and wet out. We're going straight to our speaker hole there. Just like so. Now, one other trick of the trade that we use a lot is going to be a little grooved roller or a hard roller. Some people call these a fin roller. Some people will call them a bubble buster. It's a really good way to work any air bubbles and smooth out that surface. Now we are probably just going to do the 3 layers today. We may come back and add some more right in the middle once this has kicked off and cured a bit. We're not going to worry about getting all of the glass. You have to be cautious about putting too much fiberglass on one pass, or you may create excessive heat. These little rollers really do a nice job of smoothing that out. And then obviously, like a larger one is going to span more area. Sometimes the larger ones you just can't get in the workspace. And oftentimes we will do a little bit of dabbing as well when we're what did I do with my brush? It's around here somewhere. There it is. There you go. All right, so sometimes what we will do is kind of come in here and do a light dab, or I think some people call it stippling or stipling. Work that material in, get a really nice transition there. And I'm excited to kind of see, I believe the peel ply is going to work really, really nice. That's a material I didn't grow up using a whole lot of it. It wasn't really around much when I was a boy. But I'm going to show you folks what you can also do. Now, a moment ago, we came in here and we touched up some of these smaller screw holes and whatnot with some of our little filler. And a lot of times what I like to do for a little extra strength is you can just tear little bits of the CSM or the chop strand mat while your vinylester putty is still wet. You can add a little reinforcement. These don't really require any of the 1708 or 1808 like the heavier biaxial materials in my opinion. So there again, we're going to do one more little layer on each. Wearing some gloves is important. Wearing a mask, probably not a bad idea. I've grown up around this stuff and have a pretty heavy duty tolerance for it. Sometimes you can even have these little pieces pre-torn. We certainly don't want to waste any of this vinylester, even though it is not as expensive as the epoxy. It is not necessarily cheap, and just don't want to waste any of these materials anyway. Now, one reason I like changing this over to a second container, especially a pan, is you're less likely to get this to kick off while you're working on it. If you have it in a little bucket, it's going to generate more heat within itself. The more heat it generates, the faster it cures, and you will a lot of times lose a batch. So we're going to go ahead and dab in a little material. You can see here there's a different kind of material underneath the fiberglass with these little perforations. That is called core mat. That is used sometimes to stiffen little panels in consoles, and even it will reduce print through in hull sides. And we use that when we were building some of our 19 footers in the past, especially ones with darker colored hulls. It would help reduce that print through and give you a little nicer cosmetic. And you can see here we got multiple, same deal. Let's just go ahead and, while we've got some glass going. All right, folks, come on down and check this out. We've got several layers of CSM or mat on all those little holes, and we're gonna let kind of gravity work for us tonight. Now, if there was a little glitch in the last minute or so, I apologize. Our GoPro got hot. It's still hot down here, and that was kind of a long session. But I want to show y'all one more trick before we're all done. So we've kind of squeezed as much resin as we can out of our roller, and we're all done. A lot of times you can just tap it nice and easy. And we will usually leave them out on some concrete or outside the shop, because resin that's curing inside of one of those rollers can get quite hot. So you never want to put that in a trash can or leave it where it could get in contact with something that's flammable. So what we're going to do, we're going to let our fiberglass cure overnight, and then tomorrow we will flip this thing over. All right, folks, so it's fully cured. I want y'all to come down and check out how nice that looks. Now, this is our first pass. It could be a slightly bit low there in the middle, and you can always come back and add a little more glass into the inside if you wanted to, but for the inside of the console, that looks quite nice. And on the other side, we went ahead and repaired that speaker hole, but you can see we actually used some peel ply to cover that up. And we're getting ready to actually do some sanding, but I thought while we were looking at the inside, I would show, if any of you folks have missed one of our previous episodes where we used some peel ply on a project. It's pretty cool stuff. You can apply it over curing material. Now I did it with epoxy on the previous one. This is a vinylester resin that we're using. And it leaves a really nice, it's flat but somewhat textured. It's really leaves it in a good position to receive new glass, whereas you can kind of see that is flat and somewhat textured. This is very textured where you have just the raw matte finish, but that's what the rest of the console is as well. One interesting note is if you're using a piece of peel ply like this on a flat panel, you want to be sure to leave at least one corner tabbed up or not wet out, or else you're going to have trouble finding a spot to start the removal of the peel ply. Otherwise it'll be stuck down totally flat. And again, if you haven't seen this material before, that is what peel ply looks like. It's like a fabric that you can apply over, and it will reduce the amine blush and epoxy. It will result in a flatter surface. But I think what we're going to do is pivot around. Now we tried a couple different materials, and on this one we just went with plain old blue tape, you know, your typical masking tape that's used in pretty much everything, but we put a layer of peel ply underneath it. And be honest with you, this is kind of the first time I've done it this way. Normally we just put blue tape right over the hole that we're going to do repair. But I thought you folks would be interested in seeing how the peel ply works on the reverse side of things. So that worked pretty good, actually. I'm pretty pleased with that. Now I'm going to go ahead and we would obviously remove all of the rest of this tape, but I want to show you what happens. Like we had some holes up here where there was no peel ply used, and just plain old blue tape actually works quite fine on the outside of an area that you're going to be filling. You can see how nice it's maybe ever so slightly recessed, but those were some pretty large holes there, so no need to do anything super complicated. I've seen people use all kind of different release films and cardboard inserts and all kind of interesting techniques, but we do have a little bit of resin run out, and there's a little bit of a void around the edge there. So we're gonna turn a fan on, and we're gonna be using our Festool. We've got a big vac assist. That's the RO150 FEQ, and this thing has a cool feature. It's kind of rotary or orbital, and depending on what you want to do with it, you can choose a setting that best suits your needs. And we've got an aggressive 24 grit. That is going to be a heavy duty material removal disc. And this thing's got a cool feature. Again, when you turn the switch on, it activates the little vacuum there. Also a variable speed, so for grinding, we're going to speed this thing up. So when we're grinding something like this, doing a two-sided repair, you want it nearly flush, but you do want it ever so slightly recessed so that we can add some filler on the back side, and that'll kind of help blend it or transition. We're going to be doing a little bit of touch-up, the same on these smaller ones here. We've done most of our sanding, but you'll notice there's a couple little voids sometimes around the parameter or something like this. I've already chased this out with a die grinder, just using our little DeWalt with a carbide burr. And I like to use the shop vac. Just to chase that out a bit. We want to be sure we've got a good bond. Now that would honestly probably be okay if you just left it in there. And maybe had I put a little more of our thickened epoxy in that inside edge, we could have caught some of that, but it's really not a problem. And I want to show you folks, even if you do this all the time, occasionally you're going to have something that doesn't go exactly as planned. Don't let that throw you completely off your game. And don't get stuck on that there's only one way to do things. There's a lot of different techniques that can be used out there, a lot of different methods, a lot of different materials, and feel free to experiment sometimes. Now I want to show you, we're getting ready to contour this, and we want this area here to be slightly lower than the original. And sometimes you can use something like a straight edge. And I'm looking for a little bit of a gap. I want this slightly lower than the material around it, because we're going to be adding some filler and then we're going to be adding some gel coat. Now I'm coming across there, that all looks good, but this console has a slight curve. So if you look right here, you'll notice it's touching in the middle, and as we move down, you're still going to see it's going to be making a little bit of contact over the speaker. That's okay, because there's a natural curve that way and it's straighter or more vertical that way. So we are getting really close, and again, I want to show a variety. Folks, come over here with me. Now, earlier in this episode, we took some of the colloidal silica and some of the microfibers, and we also added some of the 1/4-inch milled fibers with some of our vinylester laminating resin. And we made a real nice thickened putty or filler. Now that would be vinylester based, and that is what the repair is done with. So for you folks at home, if you just want to order 1 gallon of resin for your repair, but you also want to make a putty, it is possible to add these materials to get a thickened putty. But you can also go directly. 3M makes a premium filler that is a vinylester formulation. And then when we were building our 29 in the background, we used a lot of the Napa Pro Strand, but this is just a polyester, but it's got some fiber reinforcement in it that's gonna make it stronger than just your normal like Bondo or polyester filler. And then here more recently, we've been using a lot of the Fiberglass, which again is a short strand fiberglass filler. And in all honesty, you could probably use something like the EverCoat Formula 27, which is a water resistant. It's a very good all-around filler. We use it a lot of times when we're doing gel coat repair and we want something that's white or light in color when we're going to be finishing with a light color or white gel coat. That way they don't have as much trouble with the hide. So any of these could potentially work because they're totally compatible. If you got a vinylester resin base, totally compatible with polyester based fillers if you want to go that direction. And vinylester is also completely compatible with all of your polyester gel coats. So we're going to be mixing up a little bit of material. I think we're going to go on our larger area. I think we're going to go with the thickened putty that I made because it's got some fiber fillers in it, and this is a bigger repair, so I want to spend a little more time and effort making sure that it is really well done. Just want to get a good, clean, dust-free surface. You guys have seen me use the little squirt bottle before. You'll notice on these smaller repairs too, we ground out quite a ways out around the damage. And we wanted to chase out any little cracks that were in there. There were quite a few little spider cracks or spider webs around the perimeter, and we want the filler to kind of extend out onto fiberglass because you're going to get a better bond there. I had that question recently in the comments. Can someone sand the wax off of the surface of gel coat and just put filler on there? The answer is yes, theoretically you can, and it will stick, but it won't bond as well as if you got it down to some actual raw fiberglass there. So here we go, folks, with our thickened vinylester material there. Now this is fairly thin. You can make it thicker or thinner, kind of depending on your needs, but for what we're doing here, I've got the surface nice and flat, and it'll allow this to flow out of there a bit. If it were thicker, it might not flow as well. If you're hanging on a vertical surface, you might need a little bit thicker material. And we're going with some MEKP, and generally about 2%. About 2% is the way we want to go. 15 or 20 drops or so, and that should be fine. There's a range there. Sometimes, I know even me personally, when I'm researching something I want to do, sometimes the details and the information you're getting online can be confusing. You're going to see this change color. You can see it going from purple to green as it starts to activate. But the world of composites is an amazing one. You got to start somewhere, and obviously you want to be careful and use caution and operate within certain parameters, but want to know that sometimes people get hung up in the details, or kind of what I've heard called analysis paralysis. You kind of just analyze the heck out of something and you never actually make any progress. And again, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, you could use anything like the Formula 27, the Evercoat, premium filler, or even if your budget was a little tighter, you could go with a polyester and it would be just fine. Now, when we're all done with this project boat, we are going to be selling it. Chance somebody watching the channel may want to buy this boat, so it's good that they can see we're using premium materials though throughout. And when this boat is all done, it's going to be as good or better than it was originally. Now, we did come in here and we did a little bit of taping and masking, and I'm going to just kind of let this material flow down in there. Now again, we put some fibers and some strengthening materials, and the vinylester material itself is substantially stronger than a polyester based material might be. I'm going to just get good coverage. My plan is to use as little filler as possible. We're going to be using some thickened gel coat to skim over this once we get a little more material in there. Now sometimes too you can use a wider blade and give yourself a little more coverage, or a little more like for example, you could use a large, that's just a drywall blade that I modified. I kind of radius the edges there a little bit. Or you can buy these, like that's a Bondo brand spreader, and you can use a wider blade sometimes to get a little smoother. Sometimes you have to make more than one pass, so don't let that mess you up either. Sometimes you got to make multiple passes, but you kind of try to match the blade to the item you're working on. And while we're doing this, we've mixed enough to go ahead and get some material on the other ones as well. It's important to sand back a bit for a good bond and a nice transition. And also like to mask and tape a little bit around the perimeter so we don't get any more material in places that it's not needed. The vinylester is really cool stuff. The one thing you'd want to be aware of is the vinylester does have a little shorter shelf life than like your polyester and epoxies may. But what's cool is you can take Say for example, you have an older gallon of vinylester, it's been sitting around a while, and you get some new vinylester, you can add a little bit of the new to the old and it'll freshen it up a bit. Now we use quite a bit of material and we go through our stuff pretty rapidly, and I don't have any problem with material going bad, but in hotter climates, it's gonna go a little faster. Just the chemicals themselves are gonna react to the temperature, and you may not have as long of a shelf life as in a cooler climate. And again, it's okay if you don't get it perfect. This is going to be done in multiple passes. There's going to be some sanding of this material the next phase, and then we're going to use some thickened gel coat to fill out as much of this as possible. And then the plan ultimately when this is all done is I intend to spray this with use an additive, something like our clear, like the air dry or something like Duratec, and thin it out, and we'll spray gel coat over the whole surface. All right, so we've given this about an hour or so, folks, and that is completely cured off. Now I want to again give folks some options, and we may have folks out there that are talking about two-sided repairs. And if you wanted to use some CSM on the outside and roll that down, you could use that as an option as well. But for this console, it's very lightweight. This is a non-structural application, and having the majority of our glass on the back side is totally fine. But again, want to give you folks some options there. I get comments sometimes and people get set in just doing one particular way. And honestly, there's a lot of ways this could be done and get a good result. So I am going to do a little material removal there. Now that's the one thing about this, the Festool, that's just amazing, is that the amount of dust that's created is nearly zero. But folks know that it's always a good idea to have a little PPE. Now I'm going to fair this and shape this a bit, kind of knock it down and show you how far I would take it if it were me. All right. Here we go. Yeah, that's looking good. Now, a lot of folks are under the impression that you can't sand. Say, for example, we didn't put any wax in that. I didn't put a release film in it. I didn't put any PVA in it. And it was only about an hour ago. You can sand fiberglass resin that hasn't been sealed. And we've done this for years and years in our boat shop. It saves a ton of time because that eliminates one step. Now, it will sometimes gum up your sandpaper, but that's dust you're seeing there. That's not really gummed up paper. But that's something we get questions about, and you see a lot of times. And personally, a lot of times with something like this, but you're going to have to use an aggressive grinding disc, something like a 24 or 36 to make that work. But we went ahead and we sanded all the way out around the perimeter, kind of feathered that material in, and it's time to add a little bit of gel coat. This time we're just going with some white gel coat without wax. That's from Fiberglass Warehouse. Been real happy with their products, and they offer a discount code for Fish Bump TV viewers. So y'all be sure to check out Fiberglass Warehouse for your vinylester resin and your gel coat like we're using today. But I went ahead and I poured up, we've got a couple ounces of just pure white gel coat, no wax. Now, there's a couple of things you could do. If there were a little bit deeper imperfections there and you wanted to add some filling, you can actually add the colloidal silica to some of your base white gel coat, and that'll thicken it up and make a little paste. And we've actually got some videos elsewhere in the channel where we're doing gel coat repair, and you can see us do that. But we're gonna go ahead and catalyze this fairly hot. I'm gonna go with about 2.5 cc's, which again, that is on probably more like 2 cc's. That's gonna be on the kind of spicy side of things. But what I'm trying to do is build 2 or 3 coats of just pure gel coat over these repair areas. And as long as you stay within the parameters of the ratios of generally 1 to 2% on your gel coat, you're going to be just fine. But sometimes you'll hear me refer to, I'm going to mix this batch a little bit hot. And again, growing up in a boat shop and doing boat repairs, a lot of times we won't need things to move along as long as it doesn't compromise the quality of the job. And we're going to try to get multiple coats on this afternoon. Want to mix very, very well. Now is a good time to thank everyone for tuning into the channel. And if you haven't already subscribed, like, comment, share, tell a friend, maybe share the word on any social media platforms. And for you folks that really, really enjoy what we're doing, if you're around the house and you're just cooking or doing some cleaning and you like to have some TV on in the background or a little bit of noise going on, that does help if you guys just let the channel roll through there, and maybe subconsciously you'll be hearing that information and kind of absorb that. The more YouTube thinks that people like what they're seeing, and the longer the watch duration is, the more they recommend the channel. More channel gets recommended, the more we grow, the more of these videos we can do for you folks. So, all right, here we go. And we're just gonna use a little inexpensive chip brush. That's just a little 2-inch, inexpensive, nothing fancy. And just lay some gel coat on, nice and easy. Now don't expect it to be perfect right out of the gate. These are just kind of some build coats. There was a couple little low spots and some little pinholes, and that is quite all right. The gel coat will fill that, no problem. And a brush is actually just fine for this kind of stuff. Now there is a lot of controversy about compatibility with gel coat and epoxy. Had we used epoxy on here, not saying that it's impossible to use epoxy ever, just there can be compatibility issues. Or like if we were to use epoxy on this repair, there are some companies that recommend you let the epoxy cure for a week, 2 weeks, even up to 3 weeks before it will hold gel coat. And it's kind of one of those things that if you don't give it long enough to cure, it may not bond properly. No, we get a lot of comments on that, and if you feel like you want to do it and done it in the past, by all means, you don't have to do what I'm showing you here. This is just what I know is kind of tried and true. But what I do like about vinylester and vinylester with gel coat is vinylester is nearly as strong as epoxy, but you can go to work on it within minutes sometimes after it's cured. So we're going to go ahead and brush a good heavy coat. I'm going to let that stand for a few moments, and it's okay if we overbuild because we're going to actually knock some of that off. You can see there's some pinholes right there, and that's where a brush can be really nice about closing up. It's quite all right to get a little more aggressive if you need to work that gel coat in. Matter of fact, this whole area here is going to be resurfaced, so there's nothing wrong with kind of brushing some gel coat on the whole surface. And one of those little tricks is a lot of times you can let this stand for a few moments, and before it actually kicks in the cup, this will kind of air off, and you can usually get another coat or two on there. Okay folks, we're adding a second coat on here. We've given this just a few minutes to kind of flash off. Now it hasn't cured yet, but it's kind of got a little tackiness on the surface. And a lot of times what you can do is if you catch the gel coat just right, it'll kind of start to thicken just before it cures, and it will allow you to really build that gel coat up on there, because we are going to kind of be using this coat of gel coat as a kind of almost like a fairing or a surfacing primer. We're trying to really build up some thickness here, and we're going to sand it prior to re-gel coating the whole surface. You can see it allows you to stack more than one coat though, and it's only been a couple of minutes, but your timing has to be right on. It's, in a lot of ways, it can be like cooking or any other chemical reaction, or where you've got ingredients go and you can see that gel coat is kind of starting to thicken a bit, and I'm going out a little bit broader with this second coat and kind of overlapping a little bit and blending it into the other areas, because again, we will be sanding all this. And again, folks, there's many different ways. If you look throughout the channel, you'll see multiple repairs, and I'm using different materials. Sometimes you may live in a country where you may not have the materials we have readily available, or you may have something that you're running low on or need to use up, or your budget may not allow always the very most expensive or the best materials possible. And for some applications, honestly, if you're repairing $1 million sport fishing yacht, you're going to be probably using some higher caliber materials than if you had a little 15 or 16 foot bargain priced hand-me-down little skiff that you're just trying to get some use out of. So, you know, you don't have to use $100, $200, $300 a gallon materials. Some of the stuff that's more entry level is going to work just fine. And I'm trying really, really hard to give everyone some options and some variety there as we move through these projects, because every project's different. Even for guys like me, we don't always use the same thing. So we're going to give this just a little bit longer to tack off there, and we're going to get ready to put a coat with wax on there. So about 25 minutes or so have passed, and the gel coat has tacked off, but you'll see that I can still leave like a little bit of a fingerprint, but it's not coming off on my glove. So that is cured enough for us to add a third coat. Now again, I grew up in a boat shop, and you want to do a good job, but you want to move things along. So generally 3 coats of gel coat is enough for a primer coat or a fairing coat. Now I want to show the difference. Like, we initially started off with a gel coat without wax, and then typically when we do our last coat, you're going to finish with wax. Now float coat folks overseas are going to call gel coat with wax is referred to as flow coat. So if you're in the UK or Australia, if you hear the term flow coat, that's basically gel coat with wax. Now a lot of times what I do is I just buy the gel coat without wax, and there's a couple things you can do. You can add what's called a surface seal, or it's basically a wax dissolved in a styrene solution, and it'll help the gel coat to dry tack free, which is what the gel coat with wax does. That wax creates a surface barrier and allows the gel coat to fully cure. Now there is another option. Sometimes people will use a product called PVA. It's a green liquid. Matter of fact, I did a little video recently on the channel showing the Prevail sprayers, and you can spray a coat of PVA. That stands for polyvinyl alcohol, and it will produce a air barrier and will allow the gel coat to fully cure. But on this particular application, I think we're gonna add a little bit of the surface seal. I always like to mix it thoroughly, and it doesn't take a huge amount, 3-4% in some cases. That is a pretty good bit. I might add just a splash more. That's going to allow that gel coat to dry tack free, and typically I like to mix that in prior to adding our MEKP catalyst. And folks, I really enjoy seeing your comments, hearing what kind of projects you folks are working on. I do try really hard to respond to the ones I can. I do have a very busy life. We're still actively fishing in our 29 that we built here in the shop in our charter business, and then doing these videos and repair projects, and I've got a family that requires my time, but I still enjoy seeing what you folks are working on, and I want to thank you again for taking the time. I know there's a lot of ways you could spend your afternoon or your entertainment time, and I'm very honored that you folks are tuning into the channel, so thank you so much. All right, so here we go. Again, we're going to go fairly hot with this. I'm going to use our little squeeze bottle, and again, everything we're using here on the channel can be found, or we try to put a link below the video's description to all the products we're using. So if you want to use any of the tools that we're using, the grinders, sanders, all the way down to the chemicals and the products, and again, be sure to take advantage. Fiberglass Warehouse has got the discount code for you folks at home, and genuinely been very, very happy with their materials. Very good products. Want a good thorough mix there. Y'all will notice I'm wearing my modified Tyvek suit today. Want to keep my upper body free of some of these splatters and splashes and sanding dust, but still fairly warm in our part of the world right now. All right, we should be good to go. Just gonna clean off my little mixing stick there. And what we're gonna do this time is we're gonna overcoat everything. Y'all notice when at first coat, I kind of focused on the area, moved out a little bit bigger. And on this particular repair, it's quite large, fairly big area to be covered. There's a hair that came out of the brush. That's pretty common. Not a big deal. All right. We're really using this as a kind of a primer coat, but honestly, if you wanted to roll and tip this, if you wanted to keep going with coats, for example, like if you were happy with the color match here, typically 5 coats is going to do it, and you would do 4 coats without wax, and then the last coat you would put a wax additive in, and theoretically you could wet sand and polish this out to a shine, or you could obviously spray it. We've got some videos here on the channel of spraying gel coat. We've got some of rolling gel coat, obviously brushing gel coat. I'm not using a high quality brush today because this is going to be sanded, but if you were going to try to roll and tip, you would want to use something, a higher quality brush than these little throwaway chip brushes. We're putting a good heavy coat. Gel coat can handle it. It's not a problem. Matter of fact, if you put it on too thin, you can have more of a problem than if you put it on too thick. We're going to give that just a moment. That is one of the little tricks. You can see here we've got an ounce or so left, and a lot of times you can let that flash, or I'm going to grab my heat gun, and a lot of times you can just wave a little heat over the whole area, and that will flash some of the solvents off of the gel coat, will thicken up a little bit what's on the base there, and then you can use what's remaining in your cup. Heat gun is a handy little tool to have around the boat shop for sure. we will be allowing this to cure. Generally overnight would be completely fine. If we were early in the morning and temps were high, you could put this on in the morning and sand it within a few hours if you were just doing a rough knockdown. But generally an overnight cure is what we do in our shop. And if you folks at home are new to doing fiberglass work, I encourage everybody, there's nothing wrong with getting a little bit of material and just experiment on something, practice a little bit. Of course, we've got a depth of videos here, everything from building our 29 to building the hard top for it, and now this 21-foot blazer where we're doing transom stringer floor. It's gonna be a full restoration. We're trying to do in-depth videos that once you've watched a series or a number of our videos, you should legitimately be able to tackle projects like this. That's what I'm really trying to not just give little overviews, but like in-depth tutorial grade. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Now again, sometimes now, if I were just doing this myself without video, and I would probably let that flash a little longer, but I'm just gonna stack a little more right in here where our main, and I'm varying the angle of our brush strokes as well. When you are brushing, if you brush up, down, left, right, even diagonal, it helps everything flow out a little prettier. When we were prepping this surface, even though we did several focused spots of repair, I did sand this whole area that I'm gel coating. It is very important for the surface to be clean and wax free, dirt free. Usually like an 80 grit disc, 60 grit disc can work. But you want a good texture on that whole surface. All right, even though that's got some brush strokes and lines in it, that's gonna be okay. So our gel coat has completely cured. It's the following day, and it looks quite nice. The wax from that last coat has kind of made it to the surface there. You can still see some brush strokes, but we're fixing to do a little bit of sanding. We're gonna use some of the 3M dry guide coat, the 05860. If you're new to the channel, haven't seen me use this previously, fantastic material. It allows you to apply it over an area that you're going to be sanding or fairing, and I like to kind of tip it upside down, rotate the disc, kind of load that little applicator, and it will highlight where the highs and lows are so that we can get a very nice uniform sand on this. Now again, I got other videos where we're showing multiple steps, but for this particular job today, we're not going all the way, finishing it to a polish. If you want to know how to do that, again, we've got another video there in the channel where you would start with a finer grit. But today we're using a 60 grit, and again, going back with the big fest tool. These things are amazing. This is a fairly new tool to me, and the amount of dust this will extract, and the fact it acts as a dual action sander and a grinder is amazing. I can kind of switch the actions back and forth. We're gonna go to more of a DA action by doing a detent there, and it'll be more of a dual action sand. So let me show you folks what this is gonna look like with the 60 grit and our guide coat. I'm gonna set this out of the way a bit. All right, here we go. major time and effort saver with the guide coat and a combination of the proper tools. You can see here we've still got some low spots, and you can see the edges of where we applied our primer coat of gel coat. I'm going to continue to sand, but this would be the same principle. If you were wanting to polish this, you would probably start with like 220 grit and then go to 400, 600, 800, and 1200. But I want to show you folks the finished product. The video is running quite long, but high in detail, but we're almost there. We'll be right back. All right, that is looking pretty good. You can see we've got the vast majority of that. Now this is where the guide coat really comes in. If you look here, you can see that shadowed area. There's one right there, one there, and a couple other very subtle ones. Those would indicate areas that are still going to be somewhat low, and it would be hard to see those sometimes otherwise without a guide coat. Now one time I had an older bodywork guy show me that your hand, you can feel a lot of times little imperfections and ripples as well. And sometimes when you're fairing a larger area, something like a sander can be great, but it's pretty hard to beat something like a block, a sanding block. This one's from 3M. We're running some, that's 80 grit on there. I don't know if y'all can see that, but 80, pretty good place to start. And I felt a couple little ripples. My dad called them whoop-de-woos, just kind of little imperfections. And a block is real good. And also really good for doing around corners. You got these long straight edges. And usually we'll alternate directions, and kind of a diagonal can be real good too. You want to be super careful when blocking that you don't just continue in one groove. Or like, for example, that little low right there, really the best thing for me to do would be to add a little more gel coat at another time. We've still got numerous holes to fix, and typically if you're doing something like a console like this, you wouldn't just get one area to perfection. You would kind of fill all the holes, and then you would do your primer coated gel coat, and then you would do your finish fairing kind of all in one phase. But quite honestly, this video is running pretty long, and I'm going to be doing a whole series. There's going to be a lot of videos pertaining to getting this console in tip-top shape. But again, remember, at this point, if this was the only area you had to fix, I would probably recommend a little more gel coat in these lows, block that out, and then you could go back to our how to spray gel coat and polish gel coat series. That was a 3-part video that would detail the application of gel coat sprayed. Or remember, if you wanted to just do this with a brush or roll and tip, you could have gone 5 coats and then progressively sanded this down to a point where you could wet sand and polish it. So y'all stay tuned. The project boat, we've got transom, stringers, floors. We've got lots of gel coat repair. I know have been heavily requested. We've got some stress cracks over here in the corner that we are going to be repairing. So a lot of information. Love to hear from you folks. And remember, if you haven't already subscribed, like, comment, share, tell a friend out there in the boating community. And we just want you to know how much we appreciate you folks tuning in to our channel here, Fish Bump TV. So Captain Joe, my son Logan as my cameraman, working hard behind the scenes. And we will catch you folks next time out.